Welcome back to Extreme Highlights audio novels, where evolution points are currency, undead are assets, and one necromancer's addiction to grinding is about to make him a millionaire multiple times over. I'm your host, and today we're tearing through chapters 58 through 70 of Evolving My Undead Legion in a game-like world, where Michael transforms from a broke newbie into a crack-clearing machine, discovers the terrifying truth about advancement quests, and finally realizes that his true power isn't just evolution. It's the ability to turn monsters into money and money into evolution points in an endless, beautiful cycle. Chapter 58, Spearmanship 1/10. Michael woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. The lights of the hotel room were on, just as he had left them, thankfully, but the window covers were drawn tightly, concealing whatever lay beyond. Though the thick covers obscured the view, Michael could tell the sun had yet to rise. After stretching a little in bed, he got up and reached for his phone. It had been charging for hours and was now fully charged. Disconnecting it, he checked the time. 3:49 a.m. "I woke up pretty early," he murmured. The last time he'd passed out from mana exhaustion, he'd slept in until 9. It seemed the stronger he grew, or rather, the higher his stats climbed, the more efficiently his body could recover. This realization brought a smile to Michael's face. At least this way, he'd have more time to get things done. Oddly enough, Michael's first action wasn't to take a bath or freshen up. Instead, he returned to bed, phone in hand, and logged into the Supers Association forum. Yesterday, he hadn't had the chance to browse, but Brian's suggestion about acquiring a manual lingered in his mind. It was time to cross that off his list. Heading directly to the store section of the forum, Michael typed Spear Manual into the search bar. A flood of results appeared. However, he had forgotten to include the word basic in his search, and the results were far from beginner-friendly. Instead, a list of illustrious and advanced manuals filled his screen. The Art of the Thrust, a treatise on spearcraft and strategy. Piercing the Veil, mastery of the spear in combat and form. The Iron Fang Codex, secrets of spear warfare. Dancing with Shadows, the elegance of the spear. The Eternal Point, a spearman's guide to precision and power. From Ash to Steel, the definitive manual of spear techniques. Curiosity got the better of him, and he tapped on a few to learn more about them. The Art of the Thrust, a treatise on spearcraft and strategy. Fundamentals of spear handling, thrusting, and parrying. Strategies for using the spear in formation and single combat. Lessons on adapting to different terrains and opponents. Piercing the Veil, mastery of the spear in combat and form. Advanced techniques for precision strikes and feints. Combat stances and fluid movements for offensive and defensive maneuvers. Philosophical insights into the discipline and mental focus required for mastery. The Iron Fang Codex, secrets of spear warfare. Close-quarter techniques and counters for swords and shields. Effective use of the spear in mounted combat. Maintenance and customization of spears for maximum effectiveness. After browsing through the descriptions of the first few manuals from the search results, Michael had only one thought for all of them. Really fancy. Of course, they were undoubtedly impressive. Michael could tell from their descriptions that they were also highly practical. Had he not received Brian's advice yesterday, he might have been tempted to drool over them, but he knew better now. Though these manuals were meant to teach, it was clear they were designed for people who already had some foundation in spearcraft. Michael, he had nothing. The fact that spearmanship didn't even appear in the skills section of his panel was proof enough. These types of manuals weren't for him. Instead of speeding up his training with the spear, they'd only serve to distract someone like him, who still needed to master the basics of handling one. Shaking his head, Michael redirected his focus back to the search bar. This time, he made sure to add the word basic to his query before hitting search. A new list of results popped up almost immediately. The point and the pole, beginner's guide to spearmanship. Steps of the spear, learning the first forms. Straight as an arrow, spear basics for young warriors. The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals. Hold the line, foundations of spear wall tactics. Just from the names of the manuals alone, it was clear these were meant for beginners like Michael. As he did with the fancy manuals earlier, Michael went through the details of a few top results. The Point and the Pole, Beginner's Guide to Spearmanship. A straightforward manual covering basic grips, stances, thrusts, and spear maintenance, perfect for first-time users. Steps of the Spear, Learning the First Forms. Focuses on footwork, stability, and basic sparring techniques, with an introduction to foundational combat forms. Straight as an Arrow, Spear Basics for Young Warriors. A beginner-friendly guide designed for younger or less experienced warriors, featuring simple drills and safety tips. The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals. A comprehensive look at the basics, including defensive techniques, spear anatomy, and positioning in group combat. Hold the Line, Foundations of Spear Wall Tactics. Specialized for teamwork, this manual teaches the essentials of forming and maintaining effective spear walls in battle. These were the top 5 results, and aside from the last one, the first 4 seemed to overlap somewhat, though each had its own unique focus. Stay connected via Empire. After a moment of thought, Michael decided to buy all 5. After all, Brian had never specified how many manuals he should purchase, only that he needed something to help him with the basics of spearmanship. Besides, Michael's interest was primarily self-defense, so he'd likely focus on one manual while taking references from the others. Moments later, Michael watched as more than $5,000 disappeared from his account yet again. As expected, I can only be broke, not rich, he muttered. Even the PDF versions of the manuals were pricey. If he'd opted for physical copies, he'd probably be in debt by now. Sighing, Michael decided to start reading while it was still early. He opened the Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals, as it felt more like a book he could study without requiring immediate physical practice. He had only intended to read a little, but before he knew it, morning had come. Even the thick curtains of the hotel room couldn't fully block out the sunlight streaming in. And that wasn't all. You have understood the basic essence of spearmanship and gained the skill spearmanship. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery Proficiency, 2%. A fundamental skill for wielders of the spear, spearmanship improves the user's control, balance, and precision with this versatile weapon. It focuses on the physical mechanics and practical understanding of spear handling, making it easier to execute basic techniques. At its current mastery level, the skill grants increased handling. The spear feels lighter and more balanced in the user's grip, reducing fatigue during prolonged use. Steady strikes, thrusting and sweeping motions are smoother, with a slight boost to accuracy and follow-through. Beginner's insight, basic flaws in stance or grip are easier to recognize and correct, improving overall combat readiness. This works too. Chapter 59, Goblin Evolution, Hobgoblin 2/10. Though Michael felt he now had more knowledge about spears and how to use them, it was still just knowledge. It didn't mean he suddenly knew how to apply it. That was why the notification about gaining the spearmanship skill caught him completely by surprise. No, this should be expected, Michael murmured. He recalled reading on the forum, and even in some of his skill descriptions, that understanding a skill could influence how it was used. Looking at it from this perspective, it made sense that knowing more about something could grant one the ability to acquire a skill. However, this clearly required either a vast amount of knowledge or exceptional comprehension. Between the two, Michael could only assume he possessed great comprehension, though his grades in school would strongly disagree. In the end, he chalked it up to luck. It could also be that spearmanship was a relatively simple skill to pick up, making it easier to acquire related abilities. Michael thought back to how he had quickly gained the basic shot skill after firing a gun only a few times. Perhaps this was a similar case. But if that were true, how could he explain spending hours using a spear in the goblin world and not gaining a skill back then? Ultimately, Michael realized he didn't know enough about how these things worked. After thinking about it briefly, he decided to let it go. Looking at the bright light filtering through the thick curtains, Michael instinctively checked the time on his phone. 8:42 a.m. "It's this late already," Michael exclaimed. When had he ever enjoyed studying so much? Several thoughts passed through his mind as he got out of bed. It was daytime now, which meant it should be a little lighter in the land of origin, where time ran 3 hours behind the real world. In a place as unfamiliar as the dorm his other body resided in, Michael didn't feel comfortable performing any major activities while it was still dark. That was why, when he woke up earlier, he hadn't considered evolving his undead with the points he'd accumulated. It wasn't suitable to do that here in the hotel either, where he was surrounded by ordinary people. He had no choice but to wait. Now, with conditions likely more favorable in the land of origin, Michael got into a comfortable position on the bed and connected his consciousness to his other body. Michael felt his vision shift, and once again, he was back in the land of origin. Having traveled between the two worlds several times now, he was beginning to settle into the routine of switching. So far, there hadn't been any significant issues, but only time would tell what would happen when both versions of him started living completely separate lives. Michael had thought about this before and could only hope that, when the time came, he wouldn't develop something like an identity crisis. From the way things were going, however, it felt like a real possibility. Stay updated via Empire. Even now, despite having barely started anything in the land of origin, he already felt a growing sense of detachment from everything. Worst of all, even from his family. The land of origin was still shrouded in darkness. Being in an enclosed space only made it seem darker than what little Michael could glimpse of the outside world. Still, thanks to his enhanced eyesight, he could see reasonably well. While there didn't appear to be any immediate danger in staying where he was, Michael wasn't one to take unnecessary risks. He summoned Prince and Lucky out of the netherworld to stand guard. Then, he selected a random level 5 undead goblin from the group he had previously captured in the netherworld. Coincidentally, every monster Michael had ever turned into an undead shared a common trait: green skin, which became a dull grayish hue after being reanimated. The goblin standing in front of him was no exception. It stood at around half 28 to 3 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms, short legs, and a twisted, grotesque face resembling that of a deformed, elderly human. In comparison to the goblins, forest wolves were much more pleasant to look at. "I hope you look a little better after evolving," Michael muttered to the undead goblin. Its weak strength and low species rank didn't inspire much confidence. Of course, he wasn't expecting a reply or even a reaction, so before the thought could linger, Michael began using his talent on the undead goblin. Undead Goblin LV 5. Rank Common. Evolved to Common for 1 evolution point. Michael wasn't surprised to see an evolution point take an undead directly to 3 stars instead of 2 stars, which was the next level above, because he had already considered the possibility. Still, it felt satisfying to have his theory confirmed. What this essentially meant was that his evolution points didn't simply increase an undead's power incrementally. They either gave them an entirely new rank, pushed them to the peak of that rank, and then repeated the process. It was great to know there were no hidden obstacles. The light radiating from the goblin's body slowly dimmed, revealing its transformed figure. Standing at 4 feet tall, a grayish-green monster now stood before Michael. "Its race changed," Michael muttered, slightly surprised but quick to understand. He had initially expected a situation similar to the forest wolves, where a race change only occurred when they ranked up. But evidently, goblins had far lower innate potential compared to wolves, making their evolution path less restrictive. Undead Hobgoblin LV 6. Rank Common. Its level increased, but unlike the excitement Michael had felt when his forest wolves, Lucky and Prince, evolved to 3-star common rank undead, he couldn't muster the same enthusiasm this time. Unless it was a rare rank form, it seemed hard for him to feel truly excited. That said, the hobgoblin's new appearance was certainly something to behold. Evolution Roots. Forest Wolf. Forest Wolf, common rank, 1 3 stars. Verdant Wolf, rare rank, 1-star species. Redthorn Wolf, rare rank, 3-star species. Goblin. Goblin, common rank, 1-star monster. Hobgoblin, common rank, 3-star monster. Chapter 60, Waiting and Training 3/10. Goblins were truly ugly, and even if they were part of Michael's undead army, that didn't mean he would deny it out of camaraderie. It wasn't to the extent that one would vomit at first sight, but they pretty much fit the image of the monsters told in stories to scare children into behaving. However, the hobgoblin was a little different. It was taller, for one, resembling an early human teenager. Its previously long arms now looked proportional, and its legs, which had been abnormally short, appeared normal. At first glance, it could almost pass as a lanky teenage human of its height. But these were just minor changes. Yes, minor changes. What truly took Michael aback was its face. It was still ugly, but compared to before, it seemed almost handsome. Michael squinted his eyes, observing the undead more closely. It was indeed a little handsome, but it seemed shrouded in a faint layer of ugliness. Its face now bore a closer resemblance to a human's compared to its twisted goblin form. It felt like each evolution was steadily refining the goblin's appearance. Michael couldn't shake the suspicion that he'd be in for a major surprise if he evolved one more time. "Well, I'll find out after my daily points refresh," Michael thought. Experience new stories on Empire. Since this goblin had already evolved once, he only needed 5 more points to evolve it again. Even if he didn't take more source liquids today, his regular daily evolution points should suffice. Michael named the hobgoblin Beginning due to it being the first of its kind under him to be evolved. Since he still had 3 evolution points left, Michael used them on his other summons. He evolved the 3rd Undead Wolf he had to 3-star common rank Undead, and evolved 2 more goblins into hobgoblins. Seeing how they started to look slightly more attractive after evolving, Michael couldn't help but anticipate what future evolutions would bring. This curiosity was especially strong because he had deliberately evolved a female goblin to see if there would be any differences. To his surprise, the female goblin's appearance shifted even further toward a human-like form. She still looked ugly, but there was a strange illusion that another evolution might result in something unimaginable. Right now, she resembled a human preteen. After thinking about it for a moment, Michael decided to name her Lily. Why Lily? It was his younger cousin's name, and he thought it was a funny joke, one that, unfortunately, only he could appreciate. It would be nice to have some humanoid undead around me. It would be even better if they could talk too. Don't look at me like that, Lucky, you know I love you. It was still quite early, and Michael found himself wondering what to do. If not for the fact that cracks had restrictions, he would have entered one the moment he woke up. Unfortunately, he'd have to wait until 11 a.m. in the real world to join a team and enter a crack, which was still about 2 hours away. Feeling restless and uncomfortable doing nothing, Michael considered whether he should give cultivation another try and see if there had been any changes when this thought reminded him of the skill he had awakened earlier. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery Proficiency, 2%. A fundamental skill for wielders of the spear, spearmanship improves the user's control, balance, and precision with this versatile weapon. It focuses on the physical mechanics and practical understanding of spear handling, making it easier to execute basic techniques. At its current mastery level, the skill grants increased handling. The spear feels lighter and more balanced in the user's grip, reducing fatigue during prolonged use. Steady strikes, thrusting and sweeping motions are smoother, with a slight boost to accuracy and follow-through. Beginner's insight, basic flaws in stance or grip are easier to recognize and correct, improving overall combat readiness. This was the first weapon-focused skill Michael had awakened since becoming an Awakener, even though it had only been barely 3 days. Though he had no intention of abandoning the path of a mage to become a close combat fighter, he still wanted to take this skill seriously. In the future, if he ever faced a mage in a situation where neither party could use their magical abilities, it would be their close combat skills that would set them apart. The space around him was wide and visible, making it a suitable place to practice. Michael dismissed all his undead aside from Lucky and Prince, then retrieved his spear from his storage space. Since spearmanship seemed to be a passive skill that didn't require conscious activation, Michael immediately got to work practicing. Following the basic moves outlined in the PDF of the Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals, he had read earlier, Michael carefully practiced each movement while adhering to the instructions in the manual. As he continued, he began to feel his handling of the spear improving. He knew this was the skill's effect kicking in. Just like with his other skills, there was an almost innate awareness guiding him, letting him know what he should be doing as he moved the spear. His prior knowledge from reading the Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals, also seemed to accelerate his progress. Spearmanship proved to be also highly adaptable, getting him in the right direction while staying consistent with the movements described in the manual. After moving and practicing for around 20 minutes, Michael called out his skill panel to check his progress. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery Proficiency, 3%. A 1% increase. It wasn't that the amount was small, it was actually higher than he had expected. Seeing his progress in real time sparked something within Michael. Some people didn't fear hardship, they feared hardship without progress. But if those same people had a clear indicator of their success, like Michael was currently experiencing, they would only work harder. Michael was no exception. Fueled by this newfound determination, Michael gripped his spear with renewed focus and started practicing again with burning resolve. Compared to waiting around and doing nothing, this was the best way to spend his time. Chapter 61, Progressing Strength, to the Association 4/10. For the next hour, Michael did nothing in the land of origin but practice. He never knew practicing could be so enjoyable. Back in school, their physical education classes had focused on close combat tactics and fitness. This was why Michael could at least use spearmanship in the first place. But no one really loved physical education. To most, it was just a way for the school to keep them fit. Sure, there was a chance students could become cultivators or, even more rarely, awaken, professions tied to physical prowess, so the class wasn't unneeded. Yet the class itself wasn't enjoyable. It felt more like a chore to pass, just like most other subjects, except food and nutrition. Or maybe it wasn't that the classes were boring. It was just that, back then, everyone practiced for long periods without knowing if they were progressing. Most of the time, they felt stagnant. Now, however, Michael could detect even the slightest progress. The feeling of grinding a skill was beyond words. Spearmanship, basic mastery proficiency, 6.5%. Michael didn't know why, but it felt easier to level up this skill compared to some of his others. Perhaps it was because some of his skills were at intermediate mastery, a level higher than basic mastery, where the gap in progress felt vast. Even other skills at basic mastery, like basic shot, barely had a proficiency above 1%. Regardless of the reason, Michael was thrilled to see himself improving. After an hour and a half of training, he still felt full of energy. If anything, it seemed like the session had merely warmed him up and left him feeling great. Unfortunately, while he'd have loved to keep training and raising his proficiency, there were other things he needed to do. It should be close to 11 now, Michael thought, as he put his spear back into his storage space and moved to sit at the side of the room. He dismissed Lucky and Prince back to the Netherworld and summoned his third forest wolf alongside a few other undead goblins to guard him. These goblins were ones he hadn't managed to store in the Netherworld yet and had to keep in his storage space instead. For now, though he identified as a horde-type necromancer, Michael clearly favored quality over quantity most of the time, at least until he gained more evolution points to strengthen his undead and expand the Netherworld's capacity. To the outside world, Michael would most likely be seen as a necromancer who valued quality over quantity, or at least, that's what people would think if they saw his undead. With his precautions set, Michael connected his consciousness back to his body in the real world. He got out of bed and stretched, feeling his body. It felt slightly uncomfortable. Having a good warm-up really does make a difference. Unfortunately, he couldn't practice in the cramped space of his hotel room, nor did he have the time. Michael took his phone and checked the time, continue reading stories on Empire. It was currently 7 minutes after 10. Great, I still have an hour to get ready. Thanks to the receptionist's efforts yesterday, who helped him contact teams with reservations for crack exploration to see if they needed an extra teammate, Michael had managed to secure bookings for the next 2 days. His first appointment was in an hour, where he would meet the team that agreed to take him on. If everything went smoothly, they'd head straight into a crack. Michael took this seriously. He needed the money to buy items that would grant him more evolution points. He also needed to reach the max level in the unranked stage and prepare for his advancement to rank 1, bringing him closer to his ultimate goal of rank 2. Though he felt uncomfortable with how his real-world body wasn't as warmed up as his body in the land of origin, he could only ignore the sensation and get dressed. The hotel provided toothpaste, but Michael had forgotten to buy a toothbrush. He made do with the only option he had, using his finger. It was uncomfortable, and he still didn't feel like his mouth was properly clean. I need to buy mints after leaving the hotel, he reminded himself. Since he planned to stay away from home for a few days, he also needed other basic supplies like toothpaste and additional clothes. Speaking of clothes, the ones he had on hand were still the old set that Old Man Liu had given him. He'd already decided yesterday to get some new clothing before heading into a crack. Fortunately, there was a mall nearby, close to both the hotel and the association branch, so it wouldn't take much time. After freshening up and putting on the same clothes he'd worn the previous day, Michael made his way out of the hotel. He stopped by the mall to get the items he needed, and then headed straight to the association. By the time he arrived at the association building, it was 2 minutes to 11. He had barely avoided being late. While being a little late wouldn't have been a huge issue, Michael knew it wasn't his place to take that risk. If anyone could afford to be late, it was the team he was tagging along with, not him. After all, he needed them far more than they needed him, except he was willing to wait. Upon entering the association, Michael made his way to the familiar receptionist, whose counter was currently empty. As he walked over, he couldn't help but wonder if this lady ever took a day off. He hadn't paid much attention to the other staff in the building, so he wouldn't have noticed if someone else was absent or working in shifts. However, seeing this woman at work for 3 days in a row was a different level of dedication. Back on Earth, this would be called the grind. Finally reaching her counter, Michael was just about to greet her when she turned to look at him. Mr. Norman, by now she had already memorized his name. Seems like you managed to arrive at the same time as your team, she added, her eyes lingering on something behind him. Confused, Michael turned to look over his shoulder to see who his team was, and the familiar faces behind him left him momentarily speechless. Chapter 62, Familiar Faces 5/10. 2 girls stood behind Michael, and they were familiar. Not people he knew personally, but ones he could claim a shared connection with. Schoolmates. Yes, Michael's teammates turned out to be the 2 girls who had awakened alongside him in class, along with the genius knight, Brian Lyon. Michael didn't know the name of one of the girls, but he recognized the other, Lillian Stone. Though they'd never interacted directly, she had left an impression on him. Despite everything that had happened since then, it had only been 3 or 4 days since their awakening ceremony, and his memory of Lillian was still fresh. Why? Because during the ceremony, she was the first to be chosen and the first to awaken. If that was luck, it was a peculiar kind of luck. Even so, in all his speculation about potential teammates, Michael had never once imagined that his teammates would turn out to be his former classmates. However, after his initial surprise, Michael quickly regained his composure. He didn't know their reasons for entering a crack, but it wasn't exactly strange to encounter them. They were all members of the same association, lived in the same region, and had awakened supernatural abilities. In a way, it was inevitable that their paths would cross. It just happened a bit sooner than expected. "Hi," Michael began, choosing to introduce himself first. "I'm going to be your teammate today." He extended a hand toward the girl who had arrived with Lillian, since she was standing closer. With his oversized clothes, Michael gave off a sunny and approachable vibe, but as the girls stepped closer, they felt something off. A faint chill hung in the air around him, subtle but impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the physical temperature, it felt slightly gloomy, almost threatening. "I'm Myra, your teammate," the girl said, hesitating briefly before reaching out to shake Michael's hand. The moment their hands met, Myra flinched and pulled back quickly. His hand was ice cold. Michael noticed her reaction, but chose not to dwell on it. What he didn't realize was that his class wasn't just a source of power, it also defined him in ways he hadn't yet come to understand. Classes didn't just shape abilities, they influenced identities. As a weak, budding necromancer, Michael remained unaware of this truth. In time, though, the question would arise. Would Michael maintain his sunny disposition or fully embrace the darker traits that came with his chosen path? Even now, his subconscious was showing signs of adaptation. Not everyone would feel comfortable around corpses, but to Michael, they already felt like essential resources, ones he didn't yet have enough of. Turning to Lillian, Michael extended his hand again. "Hi Lillian, I'm Michael." "You recognize me?" Lillian asked as she hesitantly shook his hand. "You expected me not to." "No," she stammered, quickly withdrawing her hand and falling silent. She seems difficult to converse with, Michael thought, noting her reserved demeanor. He, too, wasn't someone who enjoyed talking unless necessary, but now he had to make an effort. Building some rapport with his teammates was important, not just for teamwork, but for achieving his goals. More than anything, Michael was eager to get into the crack and accomplish what mattered most, getting stronger, and if some money came along with that, well, all the better. Though brief, the 3 had already grown somewhat familiar with one another. After Myra, the team's designated leader on paper, accepted the application document from the receptionist, they made their way out of the association building. Once outside, they didn't immediately hail a ride. Instead, they gathered under the shade of a nearby tree to discuss their plans. "We are going to a corrupted-type crack, Ape region," Myra began. "Isn't this the level 2 crack?" Michael interrupted, unable to hide his surprise at the familiar name. Yesterday, when he had asked the receptionist to help him join teams with reserved crack schedules in Woodstone City, he hadn't asked for the specifics of which cracks he'd be entering. However, he was able to know their names, but it was just this. Aside from that, he knew nothing more. It was a risky decision, but Michael wasn't the type to shy away from calculated risks now. While cautious by nature, he wasn't a coward. He had confidence in his strength, or rather, in the strength of his undead companions, Lucky and Prince. With the two of them by his side, Michael felt that, short of something completely overwhelming, he could handle himself. And if there was something so dangerous it could still harm him, well, that was no longer his problem, it was the world against him. Noticing his reaction, Myra frowned slightly. "Is something the matter?" she asked cautiously. "QA." Myra was usually nonchalant about most things, but something about Michael kept her on edge. It wasn't something she could easily explain, but her instincts told her to stay on guard around him. Unfortunately, her feelings alone weren't a valid reason to dismiss him. Besides, Myra wasn't the type to act purely on emotion. At least Michael wasn't a complete stranger. As schoolmates, there was a faint sense of familiarity, even if they hadn't interacted much before. Interestingly, Myra and Lillian weren't initially acquaintances either. The two only got to know each other after chatting a few times in the class group chat Brian had added them to. Unlike Brian, who had started his journey near a village with access to quests and an abundance of low-level monsters to hunt in the nearby forest, Myra and Lillian had been unlucky. One of them had been transporting to a barren desert, while the other found herself on a desolate, abandoned island. Both situations were miserable in their own ways, and neither provided an ideal starting point. Having struggled through their misfortunes, they decided to try hunting monsters in dimensional cracks. Yesterday had been their first attempt, and they had barely made it out alive. Since they hadn't leveled up yet, they were barely different from ordinary humans without considering their skills. Fortunately, they survived and grew stronger as a result. However, leveling up was a slow process, so they decided to tackle a level 2 crack instead. They were lucky to secure it, as the team scheduled to go this morning had postponed their plans. Discover stories with Empire. However, a level 2 crack was a bit too much for them now. Realizing they needed more support, they decided to reach out to Brian for help. However, just as they were making plans to contact him, Myra received a call from the association asking if her team needed another member. As the registered leader of their group, Myra accepted, reasoning that whoever joined couldn't possibly be worse off than they were. To be honest, Myra hadn't been too thrilled about the idea of working with Brian again. Lillian felt the same. Though Brian's fame as a genius knight had painted him as a reliable ally, their interactions with him revealed something unsettling. He was overly enthusiastic, almost unnervingly so. They didn't know what it was about him, but something was differently off. Chapter 63, Knowing More About Themselves 6/10. Of course, Michael had no idea about the predicament of the two girls. If he knew, he might have even called them lucky. Had he not realized his initial location was within highly valuable ruins, he might have wanted to trade places with them, though perhaps not with the ones stranded on an island in the middle of nowhere. But the desert, he would have gladly taken that instead. Compared to being guarded by a former rank 2 monster, a creature so powerful that even strong rank 1 Awakeners would struggle against it, being in the desert was clearly the better option. As Michael noticed Myra turning her attention toward him, he calmly addressed her. "I was just a little surprised by the location of the crack we're heading to, that's all," he said evenly. "I thought it would be level 1 at most." Myra nodded, her expression unchanging. She didn't seem suspicious of Michael's response. Level 1 cracks are a great place to level up, but they're too weak. The space a corrupted dimensional crack can hold is small, so rather than waste time hunting monsters like goblins, even forest wolves, we could do the same in level 2 cracks. The numbers are about the same, but they provide more experience points, more money, and generally better rewards. Michael nodded at her reasoning. As long as the monster rank was low, monsters of this level could still be found in abundance. This was especially true for corrupted cracks. If Michael had access to numerous level 2 or even level 1 cracks, leveling up would be the least of his concerns for a while. Unfortunately, only the Federation and perhaps a few powerful individuals could monopolize cracks. Michael also picked up something in Myra's tone. It sounded like she, too, was in a hurry to level up. He couldn't help but feel her urgency might also have something to do with the academy. However, while he was curious, he decided it wasn't his business to ask. "Are we taking transportation to carry our loot?" Michael asked, shifting the conversation. Compared to Myra's motives, his thoughts were preoccupied with costs. "There's no end need. I can keep it in my location in the land of origin," Lillian stammered, answering in her usual timid manner. Michael nodded in reply, but couldn't ignore the thought running through his mind. "Tusk, am I becoming so money-hungry that I can't even afford to give basic trust anymore?" Once they clarified the crack location and loot storage space, Myra moved on to provide details about the crack itself. "Though level 2 creatures are technically still within the ability range of unranked Awakeners, we still need to be careful," Myra explained. "If I'm not mistaken, they're likely all rank 1 creatures. However, their rank can't exceed common, otherwise it would have been classified as at least a level 3 crack instead of level 2. She paused, her gaze shifting to Michael before continuing. "From the corrupted crack's name, Ape Region, it's easy to guess what kind of monsters we'll be facing. And just like the Goblin World," Myra trailed off, studying Michael's reaction. "I don't know if you've been there, but it's also a forest-type terrain." Michael met her gaze, unfazed. "I've been to the Goblin World, yesterday in fact." "Oh," Myra raised an eyebrow. "Then, if you don't mind, could you tell me your level? I'd like to know so we can avoid any accidents." From the way Myra directly asked the question after his reply, Michael guessed this had probably been her main intention all along. "I understand," Michael said. "Level 9. Michael said honestly, seeing no reason to hide his level. However, when he noticed the astonished looks of surprise on both Lillian's and Myra's faces, he realized he might have said something remarkable. "So fast," one exclaimed. "So strong," another added. The former was from Myra, the latter from Lillian. Michael sensed that something was off in the atmosphere. To clarify, he asked about their levels. "Level 7. Level 4. Surprisingly, Lillian was the most powerful one. "So low," Michael wanted to blurt out, but opted to keep it to himself. Still, his expression must have given him away, because Myra quickly went on to explain their situation in the land of origin. Michael could only twitch his mouth in response and choose not to comment further. It seemed he wasn't the only one dealt a bad hand when it came to his initial location. As for the girls, they were astonished at Michael's speed of growth. They knew even Brian, the so-called genius knight who had managed to awaken a dual class, was currently only at level 10. Of course, his progress was hindered by the nature of dual classes, which required double the experience to level up. Even so, on the surface, Michael's performance appeared only slightly inferior to Brian's. They didn't know what Michael had done to reach his current level so quickly, but it stirred a hint of respect for him in both of them. "What's your class?" Myra inquired. "Necromancer." Myra was momentarily stunned by his reply. Although she didn't know much about the class, the name alone suggested it wasn't a close combat specialization. Hearing about his high level had initially led her to assume he was a close combat awakener. If he was a support type and had reached this level, then his overall strength might be even greater than she'd imagined. Still, a hint of suspicion lingered in her mind, and she decided to confirm it for herself. Continue your journey with Empire. Detect. Level 9, Necromancer Apprentice. The result matched his words, but the reality of his class made her thoughts a little depressed. Turned out the leader was the group's weakest link. Chapter 64, New Crack, 7/10. Michael was not Brian, so he had no idea that Myra had just peeked at him using her skill. Even if he did know, he wouldn't care too much, as Detect wouldn't reveal anything overly sensitive about him. That said, if he were aware, he might feel a little uncomfortable, and perhaps even understand why Brian hated his eyes. From an off-handed point of view, Detect seemed like the kind of skill a pervert might use to snoop into someone else's personal information. It was undeniably an unsettling skill from the perspective of the one being observed. After revealing and saying a few more things, Myra decided it was time for them to head to the crack. Even with the time difference between a crack and the real world, time was still valuable. Anything else that needed to be said could be discussed once they arrived. Michael was more than happy with this decision. The location of the Level 2 crack was even closer than the Level 1 Goblin World corrupted crack. At his current speed, 10 times faster than the average human, Michael could get there in seconds if he ran at full speed. This proximity made Michael suspect that the placement of the Association branch was deliberate, given how close it was to the Level 2 crack. A Level 1 crack, even if an accident occurred, was manageable. Monsters like goblins could be resisted by ordinary people, and with supervisors as strong as Old Man Liu, the chances of a disaster were slim. Of course, casualties might still happen, but if the situation was favorable and the people in the area were prepared, the threat could be controlled. This was part of the reason humanity had survived the first wave of monsters on Aurora, because the monsters, like goblins, were relatively weak. The same couldn't be said for Level 2 cracks, which were filled with Rank 1 monsters. Even among Rank 2 cultivators, few would willingly risk their lives entering one alone. With the association so close to such a crack, it ensured that, in the event of an emergency, the strong cultivators stationed there would be able to respond in time. Since running wasn't an option for everyone, Michael and the other two chose between walking or taking a ride. Enjoy exclusive adventures from Empire. They naturally opted for the obvious choice. A ride. Life wasn't a place to make unnecessarily hard decisions. The location of the Level 2 crack, unlike the Level 1 crack, was not a place Michael was very familiar with. However, familiarity with the area wasn't necessary to enter the crack. Unlike the Goblin World corrupted crack, which had hospitals nearby, the only notable feature of this area was the number 9 public school of Woodstone City. Judging by the school's number, it was clear that either the quantity of students was extremely high or the quality varied significantly. Schools ranked number 1 were comparable to private institutions with abundant resources, while number 9 had the largest student body but far fewer resources. Well, technically, a school is a pretty good place to harvest negative emotions. Forget the students, even the teachers are depressed. The location of the crack was even more absurd than Old Man Liu's pharmacy. It was in a hotel. Is this the positive balance for the crack? Michael thought, his expression turning odd as the idea crossed his mind. Of course, the crack wasn't within the hotel building itself, but inside the VIP mansion at the back. This was where Michael and the two girls headed immediately upon arrival. When they approached the mansion, guards at the gates stopped them. They asked to see the person in charge, and soon a relatively old woman appeared. What followed was exactly the kind of covert behavior one would expect from a secret association. Michael couldn't help but wonder as he observed the old woman leading them toward the crack's entrance. Why are all the strong people I've met from the association so old? And why were they still working? Did the word retirement make them sick? While these thoughts ran through his head, he tuned in to what the old female supervisor was saying. Since you'll be entering the crack now, I can't show you around the mansion. However, once you're out, we offer basic amenities for your convenience, places to bathe, food and clothes if you don't have any. Additionally, we provide advanced benefits, like buying your corpses here instead of transporting them to the association and selling certain items. However, these options aren't as advanced as what the association's trade center can offer. The old woman continued, listing a few more features that left Michael impressed, compared to the services near this level 2 crack. Old man Liu's offerings seemed like they were made for poor people. Or perhaps it had something to do with the nature of cracks and the type of people who visited them. A person capable of clearing a level 2 crack was already an elite, and perhaps certain benefits came with that status. Soon they arrived at the crack's location. Like the entrance to the corrupted Goblin World crack, this one also looked like a tear in the void. However, it was much larger, at least a whole round bigger, and the chaotic energy it emitted was far more intense. At first glance, anyone could tell it was bad news, but the sight of it only made Michael excited. Michael didn't know what awaited him inside, but what he did know was that everything in there would translate to money for him. Okay, it's currently 11:53 a.m. and you have until 3 p.m. to be out. The time difference is 1:08, so you have a full day inside, which equals 3 hours here. I don't need to explain what happens if you exceed the time, do I? No, thank you for leading the way, Myra, the group's assigned leader replied. As for what would happen if they exceeded the time, the answer was simple. Someone strong from the outside world would enter the crack to drag them out. If there wasn't a good reason for the delay, like a sudden appearance of a powerful monster, they'd face punishment from the association. This was another duty of a crack supervisor, to monitor and provide assistance to those inside the crack. Chapter 65, Special Class, 810. When inside a crack, Michael only knew one way to open the exit, killing 1/3 of the original creatures within. 1/3 of the monsters is calculated from the moment someone first sets foot into the crack after the previous group has exited through the exit. Without meeting this requirement, it was difficult for the average supernatural to leave. According to some of the posts Michael had read on the forum about corrupted-type cracks, it wasn't uncommon for people to find themselves trapped without any way to escape. This was where the crack's supervisor came into play. The time allocated to supernaturals inside cracks wasn't just to manage the crack, but also served as an indirect signal of when rescue would arrive if they were trapped. Stay tuned to Empire. While the people inside the crack couldn't leave without killing the required number of monsters, this limitation didn't apply to those outside. However, once someone entered the crack, they would be considered part of the group inside. From that point onward, they would also need to kill 1/3 of the total monsters in the crack to leave, regardless of when they arrived. This was why the supervisors assigned to these cracks by the association were always individuals capable of single-handedly clearing the cracks themselves. If they lacked the strength to handle such situations, they would only endanger themselves and others. Supervisors, therefore, needed to meet a high standard of power to be entrusted with overseeing a crack. Of course, being rescued by the association from within a crack was not free. The association had a reliable way to extract value from rescued supernaturals. Because of this, most people tried to leave within the designated time if they could help it. However, Michael didn't think they'd need to worry about extending the time limit. They had a full day to spend inside the crack. Before entering, Michael immediately summoned his spear. The sight of the weapon in his hand surprised the two girls beside him, especially Lillian. "Aren't why you a necromancer?" she stammered. "Yeah, is that a problem?" Michael replied naturally, not finding anything odd about it. For some reason, even as a mage, he didn't feel out of place wielding a weapon like that. No, nothing," Lillian said, her voice faltering. Myra, too, chose not to comment. She was the group's weakest link and didn't feel it was her place to question how the strongest member chose to fight. As the team of three prepared to enter the crack, the old woman in charge decided to leave them to their own devices. She walked out of the room where the crack was located, casually pointing out the button they should press to summon her once they were done. All in all, it was no different from what Old Man Liu had done for Michael. After the old woman left, Lillian also drew her weapon, a long katana that made Michael's eyes glint for a moment. Slowly, Michael was starting to appreciate weapons. Unfortunately, there was nothing particularly special about the katana itself. It was of the same grade as Michael's refined iron spear. It made sense for Lillian to use a weapon like a katana, given that her class was martial artist. Michael still clearly remembered that. He wondered about the specifics of her class and how it differed from his own, Necromancer. However, the person who caught Michael's attention the most out of the two girls was Myra. Unlike him and Lillian, what Myra pulled out of her storage space wasn't a weapon. Instead, it was a set of bright red potions and a strap to secure them around her body. The sight puzzled Michael, and he couldn't help but entertain a few curious thoughts. Unable to contain his curiosity, he addressed Myra just as she finished strapping the last potion onto herself. "What's your class?" Michael asked. Since he had openly shared his own class with them, he figured it wouldn't be a big deal to ask in return, at least as long as it wasn't something too personal, like whether they had a talent, and if so, what it was. Of course, he could have just used detect on Myra, but ever since his incident with Brian, Michael had been hesitant to use the skill on humans, reserving it mostly for monsters. "Alchemist," Myra answered truthfully. There wasn't much point in hiding it, especially since she knew the method she had used to peek at Michael could just as easily be used on her. Besides, it wasn't a big deal to share. Michael was a little surprised at her class. It didn't sound like a general one. Judging by the way she carefully arranged her potions, he figured this was likely a rare one and perhaps even a special class. Michael wanted to know more about it, but unfortunately, that would be getting into personal matters. Still, since they were teammates, he assumed she'd eventually reveal a few details. While he couldn't ask about the specifics of her class, he figured it wouldn't hurt to inquire about the potions hanging across her chest. "What are those?" Michael asked, gesturing at them. "Bombs," Myra suddenly replied, a bit too enthusiastically, while fondly patting the potions as though they weren't the explosives she had just claimed them to be. Instinctively, Michael took a step back. Even Lillian, who seemed to have some prior knowledge about Myra's potions and her class, followed suit and stepped back as well. Hey, you both don't have to worry. The bombs won't just go off the way you think they will," Myra reassured them with a smile. For some reason, her words brought no relief to either Lillian or Michael. Instead, they both took another step back. After a brief moment of thought, they each took one more step, finally feeling slightly safer. However, their unease lingered. The mischievous smile on Myra's face gave the distinct impression that she was itching to blow something up, which only heightened her teammates' nerves. "Is this a specialty of your class?" Michael couldn't help but ask. "Yes, it is. This is the red mushroom potion, your number one choice for blowing something up." Chapter 66, Strange Talent 9/10. If someone unfamiliar with Myra saw her for the first time, their impression would likely be that she was a cold individual. In reality, however, the truth was far from how she appeared. Myra had been a problematic child who loved to fight. She never attended public school at the start, instead studying in private schools, yet her combative nature caused her to change schools every year. Her penchant for fighting made it impossible for her to stay in one place for long. Everything changed when her father died. Her mother fell into debt and depression, and her father's already small business was snatched away by relatives. In a world unlike the one before the Dark Age, owning a personal business was a rare privilege for the average person. Myra's world collapsed, and it was then she decided it was time to get serious, not just for her own sake, but for her mother's as well. Determined to take responsibility, she began suppressing the violent tendencies in her heart. In this new world, cultivators and awakeners were the most respected professionals, and Myra aspired to join their ranks. However, like most people, she lacked the talent for cultivation. While her talent was slightly better than Michael's and his cousin Lily's, they were still nothing remarkable. Accepting this reality at a young age, Myra didn't place her hopes on the slim chance of becoming an awakener. Instead, she focused on excelling in her studies, channeling her efforts into academics and further burying her wild side. Year after year, she failed to awaken, growing calmer with each passing ceremony. That was until her third awakening ceremony when, against all odds, a panel suddenly appeared before her eyes. In that moment, the wildness she had buried deep within her heart began to resurface. Unfortunately, her awakening didn't do much to help her control it. Name: Myra George. Race: human. Class: alchemy apprentice. Level 1. XP 0, 100. Strength 1.4. Agility 1.4. Constitution 1.3. Intelligence 4.8. Attribute points 0. Skills: crafting. Talent: damage maker. Unlocked formula: unlock 1 every 5 levels. Potion: red mushroom potion. Gift: mark of origin. Myra was one of the few awakeners to possess a talent. Her talent was also quite special. If not for Brian, she wouldn't have understood what it was about. While she was suspicious of how Brian had knowledge beyond what his membership level should allow, she had no choice but to believe him after crafting the only potion she could make. As an alchemist, Myra unlocked a formula every 5 levels, and the one she awakened with was the red mushroom potion, an offensive-type potion. Thanks to the mysterious nature of awakeners, the knowledge of the formula was already in her head. However, the potion's success rate depended heavily on the mastery level of her only skill, crafting, and her understanding of the formula itself, which was even more crucial. Unfortunately, while the materials for the potion were available in the real world, even the money she got from the association wasn't enough to cover the cost of a full set of ingredients. It wasn't until her return from the corrupted goblin world crack yesterday, after annihilating all the goblins there, thanks to Lillian's brutality, awakeners are ruthless, that she was finally able to afford the materials to make some. She tested the potion on the outskirts of the city, in the mountain ranges. The resulting explosion and destruction reignited something within Myra. However, for Lillian, who had been invited to join Myra since she was an orphan living alone, the explosion startled her fragile heart. Explosion is art. For the wild girl, she had found her true love yesterday. Unfortunately, she was still too weak to unlock more formulas and too poor to create more of the one she had, leaving her hungry for both money and power. Though she wasn't certain, Myra believed that if she could gain admission to an academy, she'd gain access to more explosive formulas. Not only would this allow her to revel in her newfound passion, but it would also make her mother proud. After all, unlocking a new formula every 5 levels didn't guarantee another explosive one like the red mushroom potion. She needed to extend her connections, and the academy was her best chance. Additionally, her talent relied on formulas like the red mushroom potion. According to Brian's description of her talent, damage maker. You have an aptitude for highly destructive creations. Any creation related to destruction will have its effects boosted by 200%. If Michael knew about this, his eyes would have popped out. Though he wouldn't trade his own talent for anything, he would have to admit that hers was something exceptional, one that would only grow stronger over time. What would happen if she could create a nuclear-like weapon, with its destructive power qualitatively boosted by 200%? It was an incredibly powerful talent, but its drawback was equally obvious. It was a profession that burned through money. Of course, Michael knew none of this and continued to eye Myra with skepticism. It wasn't until a moment later, after using Detect on a potion she was holding, that he finally spoke. Red mushroom potion. A special liquid that becomes explosive after a brief, intense vibration for 2 seconds before being thrown. Though confused by the vague description, Michael felt a bit relieved knowing the potion required deliberate action, vibration or throwing, to explode. At least it wasn't an instant hazard. Besides, he trusted that Myra wasn't crazy enough to kill herself. Still, he wondered why she hadn't placed the potion in her storage space, but chose not to comment on it. As long as you keep it on you, we've spent enough time here, let's enter the crack. Yes, Myra replied. Okay, Lillian added. After exchanging a quick glance, the three of them leapt into the crack, with Myra volunteering to take the lead. Chapter 67, they're all evolution points, 10/10. Just like with the Goblin World corrupted crack, the moment Michael stepped through, his vision shifted, and in the next instant, he found himself in a completely different location. Beside him, Myra and Lillian immediately assumed defensive stances as they arrived. Teleportation within cracks was random, and teammates could occasionally find themselves separated. However, there was a trick to minimize this. Everyone had to enter the crack within 1 minute of the first person. Any delay beyond that risked teleporting to another location entirely. Currently, Michael wasn't focused on his surroundings. After ensuring there was no immediate danger, he became more aware of the air in this world. It felt different. Compared to the chaotic nature of the Goblin World, the atmosphere here was more complete, as though the world itself was more stable. The mana in the air wasn't as turbulent either, though it was still far from the real world or the land of origin. Cracks are a mystery in themselves. The time difference in the Goblin World was 10 hours inside for every 1 hour outside. Here, it's 8 hours instead, yet it feels more whole and alive, Michael thought. This realization puzzled him, sparking intrigue, but he quickly brushed it off. Now wasn't the time to get lost in thought, nor did he possess enough knowledge to truly understand these nuances. In truth, it wasn't just Michael who sensed these differences. Awakeners with even modest perception could feel the contrast between cracks, particularly when they were weak. Only those with truly dull senses would fail to notice. For now, Michael set aside the strange feeling and refocused on the task ahead. The trees here are quite huge, Myra remarked, observing her surroundings. She didn't seem to notice anything odd about the crack, but Michael couldn't be too sure. Either way, he wasn't too interested in finding out. It was time to make money. The thought had just formed in Michael's mind when 2 circles appeared beside him and 2 undead emerged, startling the girls. Both Myra and Lillian instinctively leaped into action. Wait, they're mine, Michael yelled, breaking out in a cold sweat. Myra already had a red mushroom potion clutched in her hand, ready to throw, while Lillian had suddenly appeared just a meter away, katana drawn and glowing with a crimson aura that made Michael's heart race. The threat he felt from that blade was very real. Thankfully, both of them stopped just in time, one narrowly avoiding blowing up his undead, and the other refraining from slicing them into pieces. "These are your summons?" Myra asked, raising an eyebrow with clear interest. She tucked the potion back with a disappointed look, as though hopping for some action. Meanwhile, Lillian quickly stepped back, almost fearfully, like she wasn't the same person about to carve something in half moments ago. "These girls are not normal," Michael groaned internally as he tried to calm himself. "Yes, they're my summons," he replied. "Only these two." "No, just a part of them." "Figured." Myra gave a slightly complicated look as she activated Detect on the two undead. Her brows twitched. The first one was of a higher level than her, while the other matched her exactly. Undead Forest Wolf LV, 6. Undead Goblin LV, 4. Of course, as an Awakener, even though her class wasn't explicitly combat-oriented, Myra was still far stronger than the two undead in terms of raw stats alone. However, their appearance hinted at the potential of the Necromancer class, and the realization was terrifying. Myra, though wild by nature, had spent years tempering that part of herself to focus on intelligence and achieving good grades. It had become second nature to her to seek knowledge. This habit persisted, especially after she gained access to the Super Association Forum, a treasure trove of information about the supernatural world. Compared to the ignorance of her first 18 years, she now knew much more about how this, her new reality, operated. Right now, Michael could only contract common rank monsters, which were far weaker than most Awakeners. She has no idea. But the horrifying part was the potential for growth. As Michael got stronger, so would the rank of his undead. For most Awakeners, there was only one of them. For Michael, there could be dozens, no, hundreds, of powerful beings under his command. It was an intimidating concept, but Myra scoffed internally. "So what? When I get stronger, no matter how many undead he has, I'll blow them all up." She didn't feel inferior at all. In fact, her wild confidence stemmed from both her personality and her special class. Though it gave the same attribute points as general classes, its uniqueness and versatility made it far superior to some rare classes. Myra fully believed in her own potential and future. However, this confidence also led to a common flaw among intelligent people: overthinking or overreasoning based on existing knowledge. In this case, Myra had done the latter, evaluating Michael through the lens of common sense. She didn't realize just how wrong she was or how terrifying Michael would eventually become. For now, though, the three of them were focused on one shared goal: earning money. It was a shared problem. They were all too broke for this profession. Michael had summoned two undead from the netherworld to scout the area. He wasn't about to test his health bar against a creature that was likely rank 1, unlike the goblins in the previous crack, whose attacks he could shrug off. After explaining his plan to Myra and Lillian, Michael led the group away from their initial spot, using share senses with his undead to gain a better understanding of their surroundings. A few minutes later, the trio encountered their first monster in this crack, one of its native creatures. A black ape. "Myra, did you check the price of a complete corpse for this monster?" Michael whispered, his voice low but tinged with excitement, as they crouched behind a massive boulder. At this point, he had withdrawn his undead back to the netherworld. He occasionally peeked around its edge to observe the towering black ape just a few meters away. The creature lay sprawled on the earthy ground, deep in slumber. "Yes, I did," Myra replied, her tone calm and measured despite her own alertness. "A complete corpse, regardless of the ape's strength, is priced at $4,500. And how many apes do you think are in this crack?" "At least a few hundred, definitely more than 200. Michael quickly did the math in his head, and his breathing grew heavy as the numbers began to add up. "So, we're talking about $1 million if we wipe out every single monster, yeah." Hearing his question, Myra turned to him with a sharp gaze, her wild instincts momentarily overshadowed by genuine concern. Excitement seemed to radiate from Michael's entire being, an energy so palpable it made her uneasy. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. She may be wild, but she wasn't suicidal. Taking on over 200 rank 1 monsters, even with a strong team, was an idea bordering on madness. Just as she opened her mouth to dismiss any dangerous notions Michael might have been entertaining, her breath caught in her throat. Her heart clenched tightly as she noticed something emerge beside him, a shadowy, menacing figure. Undead Verdant Wolf LV, 11. Rank Rare. A rare-ranked undead. Myra's eyes widened as she stared at the wolf. Beside her, Michael whispered something in an almost inaudible tone, his words strange and disjointed, as if spoken in a forgotten language. She couldn't quite understand what he was saying, but amidst the whispers, Myra swore she caught a phrase like, "Evolution points, they're all evolution points." Chapter 68, Max Level. Myra couldn't wrap her head around how a rank 1 creature of rare rank had suddenly appeared beside them. No, that wasn't even the real question. The real question was, how did Michael have an undead of this level in the first place? Was he cheating? Weren't they all just 3 days into being awakeners at most? Was this guy secretly skipping steps while the rest of them struggled through the basics? Was bro flying too? It wasn't that Myra didn't believe Michael could have a rank 1 undead under his control. In fact, she had suspected it when he mentioned being level 9, so close to level 10, the max level of the unranked stage. However, Myra dismissed the idea because of the little time Michael had been an awakener. But while she hadn't ruled out the possibility of him having a rank 1 undead, what she never imagined was that not only did he have one, but it was also at rare rank. She didn't know much about necromancers or how they operated, but she understood the significance of rare-ranked creatures. At this level, monsters were not much different from awakeners who used attribute points. In other words, standing beside Michael now was essentially a genuine rank 1 awakener. Lillian, on the other hand, shared a similar train of thought as Myra. Michael, unaware of their distress, didn't have time to worry about them. He had never considered hiding his powers. Maybe he'd keep the specifics of his talent a secret. It felt too unique and powerful, likely linked to his transmigration, but he didn't see much issue in revealing his capabilities. For one, while obtaining a rank 1 undead might seem fast, it wasn't impossible. Awakeners grew stronger quickly. If they didn't, they'd barely be more special than cultivators, so this shouldn't raise too many questions. As for the rank of his undead, that was the simplest question to answer. It was because of an opportunity. What else could anyone say to that? Wasn't the land of origin said to be full of opportunities? Could they force him to explain further? For these reasons, Michael saw no benefit in hiding his powers. Why would he deliberately make himself seem weaker just to avoid unsettling others? Of course, there was a limit to how much he could reveal. This was why he summoned Prince instead of Lucky. Prince's existence could be rationalized, but Lucky pushed well beyond the boundaries of common sense, revealing it might even draw unwanted attention. Though Michael didn't actively avoid attention, he wasn't keen on it either. His cautious nature made him paranoid about the possibility of being kidnapped. By whom? He didn't know, maybe demonic cultivators, or someone with ulterior motives who saw value in him. They might even notice something connected to his talent and approach him with bad intentions. While the Federation was portrayed as a righteous faction, Michael, with the experience of his past life even though short, wasn't so quick to trust that image. Unless it was an extreme cult-like organization where everyone was brainwashed from birth, all organizations had their share of different people and agendas. Because of this, Michael felt it was wise to keep part of his full power hidden as a trump card. but showing some of his strength, that was fine. Anyway, what was so special about a one-star rare-ranked creature? If given enough time, all his undead would eventually reach this stage. Another reason Michael didn't want to engage the Black Ape himself was that, while he didn't doubt his team's ability to handle it, he disliked the risks involved. A prolonged battle could also lead to unnecessary damage to the monster's body. If it was too damaged, how could he maximize his profit? Moreover, while one day inside the crack seemed like plenty of time to hunt and exit, Michael wanted more. The monsters in the crack were renewable anyway. Why settle for only killing a third of them? There was also the part with sharing the profits with his teammates. Every monster here represented potential evolution points, and it would be a sin to let them live, or worse, let them get sold by someone else. The moment Prince arrived, the Black Ape, previously resting peacefully, immediately woke up, fully alert. It couldn't be helped. Prince's presence was overwhelming, and Michael hadn't bothered to hide it. Black Ape LV 12. Rank Common. It was a tough monster, which was why Michael was reluctant to waste time on it. "Take care of him, Prince," Michael commanded calmly. The instant the words left his mouth, a faint, violent gust of wind swept past him as Prince disappeared from his position. Prince hadn't grown significantly stronger since their last visit to the Goblin World corrupted crack. Only its skill control had clearly improved. Yet, even when moving at the same speed Lucky had shown back in the Goblin World, the generated wind wasn't nearly as intense. This had nothing to do with Lucky being weaker. Both moved at the same speed. The difference lay in the worlds themselves. This level 2 crack was clearly more stable than the level 1 crack. But Michael didn't have the time to ponder this detail. He watched as thick, robust plant vines materialized, entangling the Black Ape. Prince had used its plant control skill to completely immobilize the creature. It seemed Prince had interpreted Michael's command the same way it had back in the Goblin World, where he and Lucky had restrained goblins for Michael to kill personally. This was further reinforced by the fact that Prince, who could easily end the Black Ape with a single swipe of its claws or a bite, refrained from doing so. The command phrase had been the same, so it made sense Prince acted accordingly. "Well, this works too," Michael muttered. "I needed to level up anyway." With his spear in hand, he calmly walked toward the struggling Black Ape, which thrashed violently against its bindings. Seeing Michael head toward the Black Ape, Myra and Lillian stared at each other for a second before rushing after him. They were in shock. Lillian had already prepped herself for a tough battle, while Myra was ready to throw some explosives if needed. But in the blink of an eye, the monster, formidable at their current level, was so easily resolved that they couldn't accept it immediately. "I'm sorry, guys, I'll be taking the kill for this one. After I level up, I'll have my undead do the same for you guys. Is that okay?" "Yes, yes," Myra and Lillian replied excitedly, recovering immediately. From Michael's words, it was obvious he planned to carry them, and such luck wasn't something they'd turn down. Only Myra felt a little uncomfortable, not because of being carried, but because of the inability to set something ablaze. Still, she was smart enough to know what was better for her. At least by being carried, she could level up safely and save her bombs for another time. Myra glanced at Michael, who was intently focused on the Black Ape, a creature that stood a meter taller than him with a complicated expression on her face. She wasn't sure how to feel, especially since she had been so confident a moment ago. The Black Ape's figure was imposing and its form was tough, but this was all useless in the face of absolute power. Knowing that the monster's thick skin was difficult to penetrate, Michael targeted the weakest spot in its body, its eye. His hands moved in a blur. With a perfect standard posture, the spear in his hand drove directly into the Black Ape's left eye, piercing straight into its brain and killing it instantly. You have killed a common level 12 black ape. You've gained 398 experience points. You killed a monster 3 levels higher than your own, earning a 4x experience multiplier. You've gained 1,592 experience points. Level up. You have leveled up to level 10. You have reached the max level of the unranked stage. Rank up to accumulate experience points again and level up. You have reached max level for Necromancer Apprentice. To rank up to Adept Necromancer and continue leveling, complete your rank advancement quest. Generating rank advancement quest. Quest generated. Advancement quest. Have 10 rank 1 undead, 210. Name Michael Normans. Class Necromancer Apprentice Max. Level 10 Max. Exp 2000/2000 Max. Strength 7603. Agility 13605. Constitution 9203. Intelligence 46310. Attribute points 19. Skills Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses. Talent Infinite Evolution. Class Skill Contract Slot 18/20. Discover Stories with Empire. Gift Mark of Origin. Necromancer Class Advancement Route. Unranked Necromancer Apprentice Level 110. Rank 1 Adept Necromancer Level 1125. Rank 2. Rank 3. Evolution Routes. Forest Wolf. Forest Wolf Common Rank 1 3 stars. Verdant Wolf Rare Rank 1 star species. Redthorn Wolf Rare Rank 3-star species. Goblin. Goblin Common Rank 1-star monster. Hobgoblin Common Rank 3-star monster. Chapter 60, 9 Advancement Quest and Plans. Michael felt a familiar surge of power coursing through his body as he leveled up, yet his focus wasn't on that sensation. It finally arrived. There was a true sense of balance in everything. An advancement quest. The equivalent of a breakthrough obstacle for cultivators, but tailored for awakeners. At the maximum level of every rank, one could not progress further without completing an advancement quest. The difficulty varied wildly, depending on one's class and luck. However, completing the quest granted immense power, pushing one closer to becoming a higher being. Fortunately for Michael, he had been hit with an easy rank advancement quest. A task that might seem daunting to others, but was manageable for him. Advancement quest, have 10 rank 1 undead, progress 210. This is great, Michael muttered. I was hoping I wouldn't get something that'd slow my leveling down for weeks, or worse, months. Thankfully, it's not that bad. The thought of being stuck at the same level for too long was frustrating for any awakener. Michael had read in forums that any experience points gained while at the max level of a rank were completely wasted. They wouldn't even accumulate. Right now, even if he wiped out every black ape in this crack, the effort would amount to nothing since the experience couldn't be used to level up. I already have 2 rank 1 undead thanks to my evolution points. It only takes 6 points per rank 1 undead, so at most, I'll be done with this in another 2 days. For any other Necromancer apprentice, this quest would have been extremely challenging. They'd have to make 10 of their undead reach rank 1. With each undead requiring an average of 2,000 experience points to level up, completing this task would demand significant effort and time. Still, it wasn't the worst kind of advancement quest he could have gotten. Something like learn 10 necromancy spells would have been much worse. Without a strong foundation in necromancy, largely due to the short time he had spent as an awakener, Michael knew he'd have no hope of completing such a task. If that had been the case, entering an Awakener Academy would be nothing more than a distant dream. It's also said that starting from the first advancement quest Subsequent ones might be follow-ups based on the description, Michael thought. Either way, this quest was perfect for him. It was like killing two birds with one stone, making it the best outcome he could have hoped for. For classes like Necromancer or Beast Tamer, it was commonly known that their minions shouldn't be more than 2 ranks above them. If they were, there was a significant risk of the creatures breaking free from their control, and in most cases, turning against their master. Even if Michael were to accumulate 125 evolution points, which he suspected was enough to evolve Lucky into an extraordinary rank Undead, there was a high chance it might break through to rank 2 instead of stopping at peak of rank 1. That would be a problem. Michael didn't want to face a situation where the undead he had heavily invested in turned against him, nor did he want to risk going head-to-head with an extraordinary rank creature. Thanks to his advancement quest, though, he now had even more reason to focus on his other undead. There was something fascinating about advancement quests. They didn't just signify progress, they also presented opportunities. In a sense, an advancement quest was like laying a solid foundation. Every rank advancement boosted all stats by at least 29%, with the most important stats increasing by as much as 50%. The stronger your stats were before advancing, the more powerful you became afterward. Michael figured this was one of the reasons Awakeners were encouraged to cultivate. Unfortunately, he didn't have the luxury of time. Still, there were ways to make a rank advancement more rewarding than usual. One direct method was to surpass the quest requirements, increasing its difficulty. Just because the reward for completing an advancement quest was rank advancement didn't mean there wasn't more to gain. Michael theorized that hidden and unique classes were likely so strong because they're advancement quests, and the rewards from them were on a completely different level. This also showed another reason why strength depended on the Awakeners themselves. No one knew who was who. Anyway, Michael muttered, I'm still far from reaching 10 rank 1 undead. It was said that if someone exceeded the quest requirements without advancing, the quest description would change, turning into a limited-time challenge with higher rewards. Rank advancement not only brought an increase in power, but also made the Awakener gain new skills, so higher rewards than this had to be very good. Michael decided it was better to accumulate enough evolution points to complete his last 10 undead in one go after reaching the basic requirement. There were still many things to consider about his rank advancement, but for now, he had other priorities. You leveled up. Michael heard a voice beside him and turned to see Myra addressing him. Yes, I'm already at max level. So amazing, Lillian stammered shyly, or evident in her tone. Does she always have to stammer? Michael wondered, briefly speculating whether Lillian was just chronically shy. Can you store the body now? He asked, directing the question to Lillian. Why yes, she replied immediately. Since there was someone else to handle the task, Michael didn't see a reason to make things harder for himself. Lillian quickly stored the gigantic body of the black ape. Michael spoke again, his tone taking on a commanding edge. Subconsciously, due to his strength, the team leader role had subtly shifted to him. We only have a day here, so let's try and make the most of it, he said with a serious expression. Internally, though, he added, and by making the most of it, I mean clearing out everything that lives in this crack. The two girls had no objections to Michael's words and followed him as they resumed their exploration. With his scouting undead leading the way, Michael quickly located the crack monsters. However, since he was already at max level and killing them would waste experience points, he stuck to his earlier plan. He let Myra and Lillian handle the kills, ensuring the two divided the experience between themselves. Before long, after eliminating several more monsters, both girls reached max level as well. This was hardly surprising. The monsters in this crack were far stronger than those in the goblin world, which was overrun with weak goblins. For Awakeners, experience points multiplied based on how much stronger the defeated monsters were compared to the Awakener. The crack was teeming with rank 1 monsters, which were at least 5 levels higher than even Lillian, the strongest of the 2 girls who had entered the crack at level 5. Each kill practically guaranteed an instant level up. Naturally, the 2 reached max level in no time. Compared to Michael's calm demeanor, Myra and Lillian were overwhelmed by the rapid pace of their growth. They hadn't done much, barely anything really, and yet they'd grown significantly stronger. The feeling was dangerously addictive. If they weren't careful, they might find themselves unable to resist the urge to always invite Michael to be their teammate whenever they planned to enter a crack. If Michael knew their thoughts, he'd be thrilled. Why wouldn't he? More invitations meant more crack entries, and more entries meant more money to buy evolution points. He might even suggest they disband the team entirely and individually apply for crack entries, offering to lend them his Undead for assistance. The association wouldn't stop them either. It felt like exploiting a loophole, but only Awakeners could take advantage of such opportunities. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't even consider soloing a crack. There was also no rule stopping him from being a teammate to multiple teams. While Myra and Lillian wrestled with their conflicting feelings, Michael was fully satisfied with the speed of their advancement. Though he was somewhat curious about how other Awakeners fought and their methods, he wasn't particularly interested in watching them. His focus was firmly on the countless monsters he could kill in the next 24 hours. Spending his time searching for more monsters in the crack felt far more rewarding than observing others' performances. As for what rank advancement quests Myra and Lillian received, Michael couldn't care less. With Michael leading the way and his undead scouting ahead, the group spent the next few hours efficiently hunting down dozens more black apes. Name: Michael Normans. Class: Necromancer Apprentice Max. Level 10 Max. Exp 2000/2000 Max. Strength 7.6. Agility 13.6. Constitution 9.2. Intelligence 46.3. Attribute points 19. Skills: Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses, Spearmanship. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Class skill: Contract slot 18/20. Gift: Mark of Origin. Advancement quest: Have 10 rank 1 Undead Progress 210. Necromancer class, Advancement route. Unranked, Necromancer Apprentice, level 110. Rank 1, Adept Necromancer, level 1125. Rank 2. Rank 3. Chapter 70, Troubles of a Necromancer. Since the entire team had already reached max level, Michael decided to direct all the experience points to Prince. Aside from being the only truly deserving individual in his immediate vicinity, Michael had another reason. He wanted to run an experiment. Does a stronger undead lead to a more powerful form after evolution? Michael suspected this was the case, but he needed to confirm it through first-hand testing. How many corpses do we have now? Michael turned to Lillian and asked. 70, she replied. 4 hours had passed, and they had managed to kill this many rank 1 monsters. For most people, and even for Myra and Lillian, this was an impressive number. However, to Michael, it felt far too slow. The only thing that gave him some solace was that, despite the amount they'd killed, the portal to exit the crack had yet to appear. This meant they hadn't even killed 1/3 of the monsters yet, implying there were at least 200 in the crack. More monsters meant more money. Michael had also ensured that all the corpses were in good enough condition to fetch at least $3,000 each. If they sold all 70 for that price, the total would come to $210,000, more than double what he had earned from an entire level 1 crack. Sure, that crack had been filled with goblins, but still. This realization made Michael even more eager to hunt for more monsters. Also, the number Lillian quoted was the one that she placed in her location in the land of origin. Michael had a few slightly more damaged black ape corpses in his mark of origin for undead revival. He hadn't forgotten he needed 2 more undead to reach his max number of undead at level 10. After Myra and Lillian had reached max level and saw how much they stood to gain, they decided on the profit share. They proposed a 90-10 split, with Michael receiving 90%. While this might sound excessive, it made sense given that it was largely thanks to Michael that they were likely to leave the crack unscathed and alive without doing much but tagging along. However, as greedy as Michael was, he wasn't that greedy. He had after all taken a few monsters to himself. Michael had them revise the split, and in the end, they settled on an 80-20 division, with the 2 girls sharing the 20% of whatever profit they made. Michael couldn't have been happier with the outcome. Since everyone wanted to maximize their gains with barely any rest, they swept through the entire crack. In the next 15 hours, the exit portal opened for the 4th time, signaling that the last monster in the crack had finally been killed. "How many now, Lillian?" Michael asked, placing the freshly killed black ape aside. 340, I believe, Lillian replied, a little unsure. Michael, who had been keeping rough track himself, felt it should be about that number as well. Lillian wasn't as shy around him anymore, so she didn't stammer as much, though her voice was still soft. 340, huh? If they all sell for at least $3,000, we're looking at over $1 million, Michael said excitedly. Myra and Lillian's eyes lit up as well. One thing the 3 of them had in common was poverty. Though Myra and Lillian were only going to split 20% of the total income, if everything sold for at least $1 million, each would walk away with at least $100,000, and for barely doing anything. This was exactly the kind of life they dreamed of. The trio wasn't the only one who benefited, though. Even Prince had its share of gains. Michael had been tracking its progress. After personally killing over 300 rank 1 monsters, Prince managed to level up 6 times, accumulating about 112,000 experience points. Now it was at level 17, just 1 level behind Lucky. Michael was thrilled by its rapid growth, though he also felt a bit anxious. While it seemed like reaching rank 2 might not be too hard, the reality was very different. He noticed that starting from rank 1, every level required 50% more experience points than the previous one. Level 11 to 12, 3,500 exp. Level 12 to 13, 5,250 exp. Michael did a quick mental calculation. To reach level 25, the peak of rank 1, starting from level 11, would require at least 2 million exp. The number was daunting. Worse, as a necromancer, unless he wanted to sacrifice the advantage of his class, his own progress would be even slower. Fortunately, he had evolution points from his talent to rely on. With this, his undead progressed much faster than he did. "Okay, let's leave the crack. We've spent too much time here already," Michael said, a mix of excitement and fatigue in his voice. Though they hadn't fought much themselves, moving around non-stop for hours was mentally exhausting and physically draining, regardless of how high their stats were. As they made their way to the exit, Michael couldn't help but wonder just how vast cracks could really get. Maybe there's even one out there that's basically an entire world, he mused to himself. The idea didn't feel far-fetched. Perhaps the Aurora realm itself was nothing more than a crack. With nothing left to do in the crack, the team of 3 stepped through the exit portal and returned to the real world. The moment they were out, they tapped the button to summon the supervisor. The room housing the level 2 crack was much larger and more refined compared to the one Michael had seen with Old Man Liu. This place felt like a palace in comparison, almost heavenly. Michael couldn't help but wonder, if this is how the area around higher-level cracks looks, how extravagant must the ones for the truly high-level cracks be? He sat on a sturdy metal chair with Myra and Lillian, waiting for the supervisor to arrive. Despite spending nearly 20 hours in the crack, close to an entire day, it had been barely 3 hours in the real world. As he idly opened his status menu to check his talent section, Michael froze for a moment, staring at the screen in a daze. Apparently, without his noticing, his daily evolution points had already refreshed. In less than 4 hours, they would refresh again. Currently, Michael had 18 undead under his control, which, when including himself, gave him 19 evolution points daily. If he didn't contract any new undead in the next few hours, he would receive another 19 points, bringing his total to 38 evolution points. It was quite the haul. Enough, in fact, to evolve Prince into a 3-star rare rank undead, or to create at least 5 more rank 1 undead at 1-star rare rank, bringing him significantly closer to completing his advancement quest. Either choice wasn't a loss, but Michael had already decided on the latter. Currently, Prince was at level 17, and Michael feared that evolving him now might cause an immediate breakthrough to rank 2. Though he hadn't confirmed this suspicion yet, it was a risk he wasn't ready to take. Rank 2 creatures were no joke, and if he lost control over Prince, it would be a disaster. For now, it was better to focus on creating more rank 1 undead to strengthen his forces and ensure steady progress toward his quest. As several thoughts flashed through Michael's mind, the door to the crack containment space opened, and the familiar old female supervisor walked in alone. A few men in black waited at the entrance, standing silently. Michael noticed the woman frowning slightly as her gaze swept over the relatively less chaotic appearance of the crack. After a moment, her expression relaxed. Michael had a good guess about what she might be thinking, but was thankful she hadn't reacted the way Old Man Liu had. "I'm too exhausted to deal with anyone trying to show off by pressuring us," Michael thought. "Seems like you had a good time," the supervisor remarked, glancing at Michael and the others. Their relatively clean and unruffled appearance made them look as though they'd been on a casual, slightly dusty trip rather than a killing spree. "It's modest," Myra replied, her tone neutral. Then, as if on cue, she added, "You buy monster corpses here, right?" The old woman nodded, gesturing for them to follow as she began to lead the way. Signaling to the men at the entrance to secure the space containing the crack, she responded to Myra's question. "Yes, we do. We buy monster corpses or anything else of value that you may have brought out of the crack. What are you looking to sell?" "Corpses of the black apes," Myra replied simply. "It must be a lot, isn't it?" "It is," Myra confirmed. The old supervisor chuckled softly at the response, seeming to be in good spirits. Michael, walking slightly behind, couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. This interaction reminded him of how Brian and Old Man Liu had reacted to his crack exploits. Is there something about going on a killing spree that impresses these older supervisors? Michael wondered. Compared to the others, though, this woman hadn't mentioned anything about killing intent. Maybe she doesn't care, or maybe the team doesn't have much to begin with, he mused, considering that Prince had done most of the killing anyway. Michael soon dismissed these thoughts as the supervisor led them into an underground space. The cool, controlled atmosphere reminded Michael of the Supers Association branch. "All right, let's get to business," the woman said, turning to face them with a calm but expectant expression. "This is where the chapter ends, and here's my analysis for all the chapters narrated." Chapter 58 delivers a surprisingly chill moment as Michael wakes up early, buys 5 basic spear manuals for over $5,000, and accidentally gains the spearmanship skill just from reading proving that comprehension and knowledge can unlock skills without combat, though he's still baffled why hours of actual spear practice in the goblin world didn't do the same. Chapters 59 through 60 showcase goblin evolution in action as Michael spends his remaining points evolving a common goblin into a common hobgoblin, watching in fascination as the twisted creature transforms into something almost humanoid, and even names a female hobgoblin, Lily, after his cousin, a joke only he finds funny, while confirming that evolution costs follow a pattern: 1 point to reach 3-star common and 5 points to reach rare rank. Chapters 61 through 64 shift to the real world as Michael heads to the association for his scheduled crack entry, only to discover his teammates are Myra and Lillian, his former classmates, and through their interactions we learn Myra is an alchemist with the terrifying talent Damage Maker that doubles destructive power, while Lillian is a level 7 martial artist who somehow becomes more shy the deadlier she gets, and Michael casually reveals he's level 9. Leaving both girls stunned at his growth rate. Chapters 65 through 67 deliver the team's entry into the level 2 ape region crack, where Michael immediately summons Prince, his rare level 11 verdant wolf, and watches Myra nearly have a heart attack trying to process how a 3-day-old awakener already commands a rank 1 rare undead, while Michael's internal monologue focuses on the real priority: they're all evolution points. Chapters 68 through 70 deliver the climax as Michael kills his first black ape, gains enough experience to hit level 10 max, and receives his advancement quest. Have 10 rank 1 undead at 210 progress, a task that would take normal necromancers weeks, but for Michael is just a matter of evolution points, and then proceeds to spend the next 20 hours clearing the entire crack with Prince, amassing 340 black ape corpses worth over $1 million, watching Prince reach level 17 just 1 level behind Lucky, and realizing his daily evolution points have refreshed to 19, giving him 38 total, and the perfect opportunity to either evolve Prince to rare or create 5 more rank 1 undead to complete his quest. With 38 evolution points burning a hole in his pocket, Prince at level 17, Lucky at level 18, and $1 million worth of corpses waiting to be sold, Michael stands at a crossroads: evolve his strongest undead and risk rank 2 breakthrough leading to potential loss of control, or focus on quantity and finally become an adept necromancer. The choice will define his future, and with daily points refreshing in hours, the clock is ticking. That's it for today's Extreme Highlights breakdown. Smash that like button, subscribe to Extreme Highlights audio novels, hit the notification bell, drop your novel requests in the comments, and remember, in a world where 340 corpses equal $1 million and evolution points are the real currency, being a workaholic necromancer has never paid so well. Stay extreme, stay tuned, and keep leveling up.